In the small, dusty village of Agongo, 12-year-old Mauretta stood by the roadside every day, selling roasted maize to passing children. Those children were going to school, a place she had only watched from a distance. Her stepbrothers often laughed at her, saying cruel things like, "Books are not for girls with cracked heels." Their words hurt, but Mauretta never showed it. One hot afternoon, as she stood near the school gate, a teacher dropped a torn book. No one seemed to care, but Mauretta quietly picked it up. The pages were dirty and ripped, full of words she couldn't read, but to her, it was treasure. That night, she sat under the weak light of a smoking kerosene lamp, flipping through the pages, slowly tracing the letters with her fingers. She didn't know what they meant, but she stared at them for hours. Then, in a soft voice, she whispered to herself, "One day, these letters will know my name." No one heard her. No one cared. But inside her heart, something had started. A small fire, a secret promise. That torn book, in her tiny hands, was the beginning of everything. At 16, Mauretta's life was still filled with silence and shame. She had never stepped inside a classroom. While other girls her age were writing in notebooks and answering questions in class, Mauretta was scrubbing floors and washing dishes. Her family never let her forget that. They gave her cruel names, the worst being useless goat. That name followed her everywhere. It echoed in her ears when she was sweeping the compound, when she was fetching water, and especially when she sat alone with nothing but her thoughts. It hurt, but she had learned to keep her pain quiet. Crying only brought more insults. Every day, she worked as a cleaner in the house of an old man named Baba Shamari. He was a retired teacher who walked slowly and spoke gently. His walls were covered with words, posters, old newspaper clippings, short poems in frames. At first, Mauretta just cleaned around them, careful not to touch. But one day, she paused in front of a colourful poster with big letters. She didn't know what it said, but she kept staring. Baba Shamari noticed. He didn't say anything at first. The next morning, instead of a mop, he handed her two things, a small broken radio and a children's book with a faded cover. Mauretta didn't know how to react. No one had ever given her a gift before, especially not something like a book. She took it home, wrapped in an old scarf as if it were gold. That night, she waited for everyone to fall asleep. Then she lit a small candle, placed the book on her lap, and turned on the radio. It crackled and hissed, but soon a voice came through, slow and clear, reading a story for children. She held the book tightly, flipping pages and listening closely, trying to match the words she was hearing with the letters on the page. Her fingers traced every sentence like they were paths on a map. She couldn't read them yet, but something about them pulled her in, like they were calling her name. As the candle burned low, Mauretta pressed the book to her chest and cried. But her tears were not from sadness. They came from a deep longing, a hunger for something she had never tasted, something the world had always kept just out of reach. That night, she didn't feel useless. She felt hope, a quiet kind of hope, like the first drop of rain after months of drought. For the first time, she believed there might be more to her life than cleaning and being laughed at. Days turned into weeks. Every night after her chores were done and the house was quiet, Mauretta would sit with her book and radio. She began to notice patterns. Some sounds matched the same group of letters. The word dog came up a lot. She began to recognize it. She would whisper it over and over again until it felt natural in her mouth. Dog, dog, dog. It was just one word, but it was her victory, her secret. When she heard it again on the radio and saw it on the page, she smiled like someone who had found a hidden door. During the day, she started paying more attention to the newspapers lying around Baba Shomari's house. She would glance quickly while dusting. When she saw a word she recognized, even just one, her heart jumped. It felt like solving a puzzle, slowly, piece by piece. She never told anyone. Her family still called her names, and the other villagers still looked down on her. But inside, she was changing. One day, Baba Shamari handed her a new book, a thicker one with bigger letters. He smiled and said, "You're not just a cleaner, Mauretta. I see the way you look at words. Keep going." She wanted to hug him, but didn't know how. so she just nodded and held the book close. It was like he had seen the tiny light inside her, the one she had been trying to protect from the wind. She began writing down letters on old cereal boxes she found in the trash. She practiced sounding them out, matching them to radio jingles and market signs. When she swept the floor, she would say the letters out loud, pretending it was part of a song. In the market, when women laughed at her bare feet or dirty clothes, she didn't care as much anymore. They didn't know that at night, she was teaching herself something they had taken for granted. No one believed she could learn. No one helped, except Baba Shamari and his quiet gifts. But Mauretta had something stronger than help. She had a deep, stubborn fire inside her. A voice in her heart kept saying, "Keep going. Don't stop. These words will be yours one day." And so Mauretta kept reading, kept listening, kept trying. The broken radio became her teacher. The old children's book became her friend. And the girl once called Useless Goat was slowly, secretly becoming someone new. And at night, when the whole house was silent and her employers were asleep, Mauretta would tiptoe into the small study room. Her heart would beat fast, not from fear, but from excitement. This was her secret place, where learning lived in the shadows. She would sit on the cold floor with a notebook made from torn paper she had found in the trash. The air was quiet, except for the ticking clock and the soft sound of the radio she had hidden under a cloth. Every night, the radio became her teacher. She would listen to advertisements, songs, and stories, repeating the words softly until they stuck in her mind. When she heard a word she remembered from the newspaper, her eyes would light up. She would find that same word in the headlines and try to sound it out, her finger slowly tracing each letter like she was unlocking a treasure. In the market, people laughed at her. Some called her foolish when they saw her staring too long at cereal boxes or old posters. Neighbours would giggle and whisper, saying she was pretending to be smart. But Mauretta didn't care. They didn't know what she was doing. They didn't know that at night, she practiced reading from the backs of tins, empty packets, and magazines that others had thrown away. She would bring them home like treasure, hiding them under her mattress. Her room was full of secret lessons, torn labels, crumpled flyers, old comics with missing pages. During the day, she worked and smiled quietly. At night, she studied by candlelight. The candle was small and weak, but it was enough to see the letters. Sometimes her eyes hurt, and sometimes she fell asleep with the book still in her hands. But she never stopped. She knew this path was hers to walk alone. No one clapped for her. No one noticed her progress. But she noticed. The day she could read a full word without help, she smiled for hours. It felt like flying. Years passed like this. Everyone around her thought she was still the same barefoot girl who cleaned houses and knew nothing. But in truth, she was changing. Every word she learned, every sentence she sounded out made her stronger. The girl who was once mocked now held a quiet power inside her. Her light was still small, but it was growing. Slowly, secretly, Mauretta was building something no one could take away. Her voice, her knowledge, her future. And though no one knew it yet, the girl they ignored was going to surprise the whole world. At the age of 25, Mauretta walked into a public library in Mbale for the first time. Her heart was pounding in her chest. The building was big, quiet, and full of books. Too many books. She felt small standing between the tall shelves, but something inside her told her to keep going. She had come a long way from Agongo village, where she was once laughed at for even holding a book. For years, she had been learning in silence, reading scraps of newspapers, old cereal boxes and magazines. She had taught herself one word at a time, one letter at a time. Now, here she was, standing in a real library, with clean books and real pages. She sat down in a quiet corner with a small children's book. Her hands were shaking, but she opened it anyway. She took a deep breath and began to read out loud, her voice barely above a whisper. The dog ran fast. She paused after each word, eyes wide, as if she couldn't believe what she had just said. Her fingers trembled as they followed each word. Her lips moved carefully, shaping the sounds. Her voice cracked. Then came the second sentence, and the third, and suddenly Mauretta was reading, not perfectly, not quickly, but clearly, out loud, in front of others, for the first time in her life. An NGO worker who happened to be in the library turned and watched her. She had been reading quietly nearby and was surprised to hear someone speaking with such effort and emotion. She walked over and asked, "Is this your first time reading a full sentence?" Mauretta nodded slowly, her eyes full of tears. She couldn't even answer properly. The woman sat beside her and listened as Mauretta finished the short story. Every word, like a mountain climbed. When she finally closed the book, her hands were shaking and her face was wet with tears. But she was smiling. That moment changed everything. The NGO worker asked if she could record Mauretta reading again. "Just a short video," she said. "Your courage might help others." Mauretta was shy but agreed. She read the same sentence. The dog ran fast. The video was posted online by the NGO. Just a few seconds of a woman in her 20s reading a sentence written for 6-year-olds. At first, people laughed. Some commented rude things. Some found it funny. But others saw something deeper. They saw the emotion in Mauretta's voice. They saw her hands tremble as she held the book. And when she finished the story with tears in her eyes and a smile on her face, millions of people were moved. The video went viral. People from all over the country shared it. Some said they cried watching it. Others said they wished they had her courage. Many said she reminded them of their mothers, sisters, or a version of themselves who had been forgotten. News stations started calling. Radio shows wanted to interview her. Suddenly, the woman who had spent years reading in the shadows was now in the spotlight. Her name was spoken with respect. Her voice, once called useless, was now called powerful. The NGO invited her to take part in an adult literacy radio challenge. It was a learning competition for adults who had missed out on school. Mauretta had never been on a stage before. She had never worn a microphone or sat in front of an audience. But she showed up. She walked up to the microphone with the same courage she had when she first read under candlelight. And when it was her turn, she read a short story out loud, slow, careful, and full of emotion. People listened, really listened. There were no fancy words. It wasn't a speech. It was just Mauretta reading a simple story. But every word felt like a victory. Every sentence was a mountain she had climbed with bare feet. And when she finished, there was silence, then applause, and then tears. Even the judges wiped their eyes. That night, the clip of her reading was played again on national radio. This time, no one laughed. They played her voice again and again. The dog ran fast, and the story that followed touched hearts everywhere. Messages poured in from people who had never finished school, people who had always been afraid to try, parents who wanted to go back and learn, just like Mauretta. She had become a symbol of hope. Mauretta never planned for any of this. She just wanted to read, to understand the words in books, to stop pretending. But her small act of bravery, reading a children's book out loud in a quiet library, had become something much bigger. She had broken the silence. She had shown that it's never too late, and that even the simplest sentence can carry the deepest meaning when it comes from a heart that has waited years to be heard. And for the first time, Mauretta knew her voice mattered. Just a few months after her video went viral, Mauretta's life changed in ways she never imagined. People who once walked past her without a glance were now stopping her in the street. Children waved at her. Elders called her Daughter of Hope. Everyone wanted to hear her story. The story of a woman who taught herself how to read with torn cereal boxes, old newspapers, and a broken radio. But even as the world started paying attention, Mauretta stayed humble. She still walked with quiet steps, still carried that old children's book like it was treasure. But now, her voice had power. It carried something no one could ignore: truth, struggle, and hope. A national TV producer heard her reading on the radio and called her for a meeting. Mauretta was nervous. She wore the same dress she had worn during her library reading. She didn't have much, but she had heart. The producer smiled and said, "We want you to share stories, just like you did on the radio, but this time, on television. People need to hear your voice." Mauretta didn't understand everything at first. "Me? On TV?" she asked softly. "I'm not a newsreader." The producer replied, "No, you're not. You're something better. You're real." And that's how her show, Read with Mauretta, was born. It was a late-night show, quiet and warm, like bedtime itself. The studio was simple, just a chair, a soft light, a shelf full of books, and Mauretta. Every night, people from across the country tuned in to hear her read. She didn't use big, fancy words. She read slowly, gently, like she was reading to a child who needed comfort. She shared African folk tales about clever animals, brave girls, and wise elders. She read bedtime stories with soft voices and wide eyes. She even read news headlines one word at a time, reminding viewers that every sentence had value, just like every person. Her audience grew fast. From city towers to village huts, people gathered to watch her. Some sat with their children, letting Mauretta's calm voice fill the room. Others watched alone, wiping tears as they remembered how they had once felt too old, too late, or too broken to learn. But now they believed again. Because if Mauretta could do it, barefoot, uneducated, once called a useless goat, then maybe they could too. Each night, after reading her final story, Mauretta would look into the camera, her voice steady and proud. She ended every episode the same way. "They called me illiterate. Now I call the nation to listen." And the nation did. Her voice wasn't just reading stories. It was healing old wounds. It was telling every forgotten girl, every shamed adult, every mock dreamer that it wasn't too late. She became more than a TV host. She became a symbol. Schools invited her to speak. Literacy centres used her name as inspiration. Mothers named their daughters Mauretta. Children drew her face in their notebooks. But behind the camera, Mauretta never changed. She still practiced words before each show. She still read every book like it was her first. She still walked into bookstores with wonder in her eyes. And when she visited villages, she knelt down to speak to girls who looked like her younger self. Dusty feet, shy eyes, full of dreams. She would tell them, "You are not too poor to learn. You are not too late to grow. I started with nothing but hope and a broken radio. You can start too." People couldn't get enough of her story, but Mauretta always made it clear. This wasn't just about her. This was about every person who had ever been told they were too stupid, too slow, or too weak to learn. Her show wasn't just entertainment. It was a quiet revolution. One voice, one word, one sentence at a time. Famous people invited her to events. She sat beside ministers and celebrities, but she never forgot Ogongo village. She never forgot the pain of being mocked. And she never forgot the moment when she first whispered under a kerosene lamp, "One day, these letters will know my name." That dream had come true, and now she was helping others dream too. And so, every night, in homes big and small, across cities and fields, people tuned in, not just for the stories, but for Mauretta, for her courage, for her kindness, for her voice. And with each word she read, she gave something precious to the world. Belief. Belief that the past does not define the future. Belief that even the smallest voice, once ignored, can become the loudest call of hope. Years after her first sentence, Mauretta did something even bigger. She started the Firelight Library project. It was her dream to make sure that no child had to sit outside a school like she once did. She remembered walking barefoot through dusty roads, watching others learn while she sold maize. Now she wanted to bring books to every poor village, even the ones where people still thought books were only for the rich. So she created small reading corners in churches, under trees, in old shops, anywhere a child could sit and turn a page. These were not fancy libraries, but they were full of colour, stories, and hope. Children who had never held a book before could now hold one of their own. Then came the day of the National Awards ceremony. Mauretta was invited as a guest of honour. The big hall was full of leaders, cameras and shining lights. But in the front row sat her stepbrothers, the same boys who once mocked her, calling her a girl with cracked heels. They watched in silence as Mauretta stood on stage in a beautiful dress, holding a book she had written herself. She opened it, smiled and read a small part out loud. Her voice was calm, strong and full of power. The girl they once laughed at had become the voice of a nation.